This is Janet Diane Moya Swerdlow with another news podcast for expansions.com. Now, what's really interesting during this last week of October is Stewart has a video on YouTube from his Free Your Mind conference that is now approaching 220,000 views. So for us, that's a lot of views. So for some reason, this one is really getting a lot of attention. It's about CERN, Project Bluebeam, and the portal to hell. And what's interesting to me is that I didn't realize that this particular website that's been promoting it has a lot of his articles and videos on there. So if you have a chance, search for CERN, Project Bluebeam, and Portal to Hell on YouTube, and be sure you watch that and share with your friends. When it reached 200,000, I was surprised. It's up to almost 220,000, and I said, well, do you think we can get 300,000? I guess maybe some of the world is getting more ready for some of the things that we're sharing. So anyway, please pass that along and watch that one. And for the news in this very last week of October, I wanted to tell you, and maybe you've seen this, that the European Space Station and the Russians are now teaming up to supposedly colonize the moon. Apparently, they've announced that they're going to join forces to build a permanent human settlement on the moon. The venture, which is called Luna 27, is set to launch its first mission in just 5 years' time. And apparently, they're going to go to the previously unexplored south pole of the moon and assess whether there is any water or raw materials to create fuel and oxygen. They do believe that because it's shrouded in darkness that it may contain ice. And the project's lead engineer says, quote, "This whole series of missions feels like the beginning of the return to the moon, but it is also starting something new in terms of overall exploration of the solar system." So, here we go. Like Stewart and I have been telling you for many years. And then Mars, of course, is consistently in the news, and now they're claiming that the NASA photos are showing ancient hieroglyphs carved into rock. Now, of course, the Mars or the NASA people are just saying the only thing they found evidence of is water that's flowing on the surface of Mars. But they say right now there's no evidence yet of any life being present on the red planet. But this is causing, again, another storm all over the internet, so there's a reason that they're putting it out. And some of the skeptics are saying that it's just texture in the rocks. So let's watch that story and see what happens. And of course, as you know, Stewart and I have been telling you that the world is actually on the brink of an ice age. And now we have that in the news. This particular article says that Britain faces decades of savage winters driven by freak changes in global ocean conditions and a weakening of the sun. This article claims that there will be crippling blizzards, snowstorms, and sub-zero temperatures, threatening a yearly dose of Arctic misery for the next 50 years at least, and get this, possibly decades more. Climate experts warn that a rare weather pattern of water cooling in the North Atlantic will trigger a chain of reaction of events leading to, quote, a fully blown ice age. They say that the UK is on alert for a serious climate situation with regular winter whiteouts pushing emergency services to the limit. Apparently, long-term accumulative effects could be that parts of Northern Europe will cool dramatically. They are assuming that the Atlantic current slowdown theory is correct, and therefore there should be abnormally cold water off of Greenland, which will remain consistent and will continue to partially block the transport of warm water and correspondingly warm air into Western Europe for years. This is according to AccuWeather's senior meteorologist Alex Sosnowski. Apparently, they are now saying they have to address global warming. They're saying this could be offset by recent global warming. And Britain will, however, would still see cooler than average winters in years to come. And a spokesman for the meteorologist office says a return to low solar activity not seen for centuries could increase the chances of cold winters in Europe and eastern parts of the U.S., but would not halt global warming. So they still have to tell you about that. He continues, a return of grand solar minimum could affect European and eastern winters. This serious climate situation is also something that is unlikely to correct itself overnight as repeated analysis of past cycles and other contributing factors in relation to the current solar output and size and frequency of sunspots reveal to us quite conclusively that we are heading into something like a Maunder minimum, which is a time when the Thames used to freeze over regularly in London, or a fully blown ice age in the coming years and decades. So now we have people saying we can't avoid this anymore. And of course, as you know, Stewart and I have been talking to you about this for many, many years. Now, another thing I've been talking to you about off and on through the years is it's my opinion that oftentimes when they build dams, that they do that to flood historical sites and they don't want you there exploring. Well, listen to this. There's a church in the southern Mexican state of Chiapas known as the Temple of Cachula, built in 1564, that when the water levels dropped from a lake that was created by a dam, this church began supposedly, to lack of better words, rising from the waters. Apparently, it was submerged in 1966 under almost 100 feet of water when a dam was constructed nearby. Now, when we were in Suriname, again, the same kind of situation. They were busy relocating people because they're going to build some dams, and the people were upset because this is not only their homeland, but their sacred sites and so on and so forth. But what's going to happen? The dam is going to be built or the people are going to win? Well, most likely the people aren't going to win. Those people will be moved, and again, we will have more sacred sites and people's living areas will be submerged. So in my opinion, it is easier, faster, and cheaper for them to hide history by building all these dams. And just watch for more of these kind of things to happen, if you're so lucky as to hear or know about them. And here's another interesting story about a highly venomous sea snake, which is being seen in California for the first time in 30 years. Apparently, people are watching or finding them on the beach, and the environmentalists are telling people not to touch them, but to report them, because this yellow-bellied sea snake produces some of the most lethal venom in the world. So we know when there are things that are happening in the ocean, we begin seeing unusual things. So why did it disappear and why is it coming back? That's a question for you. And of course, another situation here, which the majority of you probably know by now, is that Stewart and I are not vegetarians, and that upsets a lot of people for a variety of reasons. But here we have a study that shows that a vegetarian diet does something terrible to men, which is something Stewart and I have been saying again for years. Apparently, an experiment done by researchers at Loma Linda University took 443 meat eaters and 31 vegetarians and vegans, and they monitored them between 2009 and 2013. They initially assumed that the vegetarian sperm would be healthy, but apparently they found out that the vegetarian diet significantly affects sperm quality. Vegetarian and vegan diets were associated with much lower sperm counts than omnivorous diets. Although these people are not infertile, it is likely to play a factor in conception, particularly for couples who are trying to conceive naturally the old-fashioned way. Well, that's the way they should be trying to conceive, obviously. But I have a story that I've been researching in the next week or two. I'm going to tell you about that one, because if my research proves true, eventually the old-fashioned way, which that's the way it's being termed, is going to at some point in time be considered a primitive way and something that people no longer do. And this is a little bit different than the artificial womb, but watch for this story because it's very interesting to me. Anyway, this study found that vegetarians had 30% lower concentrations of sperm, and their sperm was also weaker in terms of movement. Now, some people want to blame vegetarians' high consumption of soy because in a study done 3 years ago, soy was discovered to shrink sperm count due to its high content of phytoestrogen, which is similar to a female hormone that blocks sperm production. And the researchers say, quote, "For children who have grown up with those kinds of diets, it may have impact on sperm quality from puberty." So again, be careful if you're a vegetarian or a vegan. Also, I would say to watch your soy intake. So keep that in mind. Now, mind control. Not that it's in the news and reported that way very often, but in my opinion, that's what this is telling you about, because this story says that scientists claim they can change your belief on immigrants and God with magnets. That sounds like mind control. It says that attitudes toward God and immigrants can be changed by beaming magnetic waves into the brain. A bizarre experiment claims to be able to make Christians no longer believe in God and make people open their arms to migrants, an experiment some may find as a threat to their values. Scientists looked at how the brain resolves abstract ideological problems, and then using a technique called transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS, researchers, and get this, they safely, I don't know how you safely, but they safely shut down certain groups of neurons in the brains of volunteers. They found that the technique radically altered religious perceptions and prejudice. Belief in God was reduced almost by 1/3, while participants became 28.5% less bothered by immigration numbers. So, again, mind control. Now, the Shroud of Turin, of course, has always been surrounded by a lot of mystery, and of course a lot of claims have been made about it. This newest article claims that it has global origins. So again, global origins, there's a reason why they're using that terminology. Apparently it was tested again by another group of Italian researchers, and of course it is disputed whether or not it is the burial cloth of Jesus Christ, and so we want to keep that in mind. But they say that the shroud contains DNA from plants all over the earth, and of course they're talking about how they think that happened or didn't happen, but again there's kind of tying the Jesus story into the global origins. So from that we might as well talk about extraterrestrial origins, why not? And the rise of polyamory. Now I've been telling you about this as well as we've been talking about what's been happening with the sexuality here in the US. That advocates and skeptics alike agree that although polyamory will continue to spread, it won't replace monogamy, well, at least not yet. But it says the U.S. isn't legalizing polyamorous marriage anytime soon, because if it does, sorting out the legal aspects will be a headache, from taxes to inheritance to divorce. However, experts predict that it's only a matter of time before the law embraces many member marriages, and that's what I've been telling you. Meanwhile, she says people will continue to experiment with polyamory because the real trend is toward more tolerance and acceptance of diversity. Now, it also says in the same article, because I wanted to explain to you what it is, which in my opinion is like group marriage, but this article says there's not a standard definition of polyamory. Most poly people agree on its principle, but then they fill in the details themselves. Which is, what I think is kind of interesting at the end, they say that sex and relationship therapists have noticed a rise in polyclimate. So that means if you're going to this kind of a therapist, that there are issues within the polyamorous type of marriages. So if that's the case, then maybe they're not so great anyway, but let's just take a look at that. All signs point to an upward trend. So you want to think about that, because sometimes it's difficult living with yourself, and then you add another person, that's difficult, and then you add a bunch more people, that can be difficult. So you need to, again, think about what you do. However, animals, you know, they have sex with a lot of variety of different partners, and I talk to you a lot about the animal mind. So you want to be sure and watch my pay-per-view webinar on the animal mind and how that affects your sexuality. Speaking of which, the University of Texas, Austin, next fall is going to protest concealed handguns on campus by, listen to this, strapping gigantic swinging dildos to their backpacks. Because they're saying that Texas did not legally purchase or did not legalize the purchase of dildos until 2008. However, the campus is allowing guns, which they're likening that to dildos. So again, this is another way to put forward a lot of very strange thoughts, feelings, and programming, in my opinion. So let's see what happens next fall when concealed handguns are brought to school and the dildos are on the backpacks. Let's find out. Now, this one is kind of interesting to me, and I want you to look at this clip and tell me if you think it's real or not. I looked at it and I thought there's a real strong possibility it could be real. There was a weird animal with a body of a buffalo and the head of a crocodile found in a remote village in Thailand. The creature appears to have rough, scaly head of a reptile and limbs and hooves of a mammal. They're saying that it's a genetic mutation between a buffalo and a crocodile. It has calf-like hooves. And there's a video of it, and there's people touching it and moving it around. It looks real, but you watch it and you tell me what you think. And in Minnesota, a woman has been arrested because she allegedly sent anonymous letters to her neighbors saying such things as she wanted to taste the neighbors' children. This woman, Carrie Pernula, 38 years old, was upset because her neighbor's 2 elementary school-aged children were leaving toys in her yard and on her porch. So she began sending messages to them anonymously, saying things like, "The children look delicious, may I have a taste, lick your children," all kinds of things like this. So they, of course, reported her to the police. See what happens. And now here's a trend that apparently is becoming quite popular in Puerto Rico. And of course, they always want to report things further away places before they bring it closer to home. Apparently, a woman's son was tragically shot on October 11th, earlier this month. He was only 23, he's going to be 23 years old. So apparently she worked with a funeral company in Puerto Rico to prop him up in front of a table of dominoes, giving him one last party to celebrate his send-off. His body went on display at his mother's bar, and then they have their pictures with this one too. He's propped up next to a jukebox, seeming to enjoy one last game. He's wearing a blue tracksuit, and his friends and family took turns sitting next to him. And apparently in Puerto Rico this practice is legal, and his funeral home in San Juan specializes in making dioramas out of the deceased. Now, of course, also remember, as this story is being reported, that we are coming up close to Halloween here in the U.S., the Day of the Dead down in Mexico, and there are a lot of other cultures who do celebrate with the corpses of their people who have their ancestors who have been deceased. Some of them dig them up, they redress them, they carry them around. There are all kinds of rituals that people do with the dead. And of course, my feeling is that this is preparing us here in the U.S. for the New World religion. So anyway, it's up to you what you think about that, but I think it's not necessarily the best thing to do. And this is a story that came out in 2013, and I report about this on my blog actually about once a year, but I'm going to actually tell you about it as well, because on the blog we're talking about money, what it is and how to get it. And of course, as most of you know if you read my blogs, money is really energy. That's why it's called currency, because it's energy. It also relates to oversoul, and it relates to what you're doing in your life. Anyway, apparently here in the U.S., there are state, federal agencies, and other organizations, this was reported back in 2013, collectively holding more than $58 billion in unclaimed cash and benefits, which is roughly $186 for every U.S. resident. It says the unclaimed property comes from a variety of sources, including abandoned bank accounts, stock holdings, unclaimed life insurance payouts, and forgotten pension benefits. In 2012, a Connecticut resident claimed $32.8 million, proceeds from the sale of nearly 1.3 million shares of stock. And in 2013, more than $300 million in pension benefits is currently owed to some 38,000 people. The unclaimed benefits range from 12 cents to over $704,000. The majority of the forgotten funds, roughly $41.7 billion, are held by the states. So apparently, they are required, the state law, according to state laws, financial institutions and other companies are required to turn over any funds considered abandoned, including uncashed paychecks, forgotten bank account balances, unclaimed refunds, insurance payouts, contents of safe deposit boxes, and any unusual items that they find that's unclaimed. Now, the money belongs to the owner in perpetuity, which means even if the owner dies, then their heirs could come back and claim it. So, at the end of this news podcast, if you scroll down the links, there will be the links to unclaimedproperty.org, and you can go on there, check your state. You can check for yourself and all the different states you've lived, under all the different names you have lived, and your heirs. So if you have parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, cousins, Now, anybody that you are related to, you can also look to see if their names are on there. And I have found a couple of relatives of mine that are on there, people that I know have been on there. Personally, I've never found anything for myself, but every year we have people writing in telling us that yes, they have looked on this website and they have gotten some money back. So please check that out, because this is one reason why people don't have money, because it is somewhere being stored, being held, and people are just letting it go. So keep that in mind. And again, I want to remind you, please check out Stewart's video that's almost 220,000 views on Project Bluebeam, CERN, and it's also got on there the title Portal to Hell. So you want to find out what that's about and then share that with your friends. Let's see if we can reach 300,000. That would be great to have so many people being aware of our work out there. I want to invite you, please, to like our Facebook page. Stewart's friends, he's got practically 1,000 or more in the waiting, so you can't really get on his list. I've got a couple hundred spaces still open on my Facebook page. And also, of course, we want you to like the fan page, Expansions fan page, because that helps us in the Google ratings. And finally, I want to remind you, in January is our week-long Hyperspace Oversoul class. So we want to get people there, because this is where we get really intense with the work we do. We make sure your foundation is in place with Hyperspace Oversoul techniques. We find out what you need to move forward into the next year. We help you with that. If you're interested in our Oversoul Mastermind group, you must have taken the January class. There are other requirements as well, but that one you must have, and we only do this one once a year. So with that said, I want to thank you, JanetDianeMoriaSwerdlow.com, or JanetDianeMoriaSwerdlow for Expansions.com, and I look forward to seeing you again.